Today, we're going to be talking about 5 of the key players we're all talking about at the moment and whether or not we should be buying them ahead of game week 10. So first up is a very popular pick at the moment. It's Bukayo Saka, and his ownership is still very, very high, despite the fact he has recently been injured. Obviously, he recovered well enough over the international break. Luckily, he was rested for England as well, so he did recover fully. And despite the fact that he is 50% owned near enough, quite a few people will have taken him out of their sides before the international break when they heard that he wasn't going to be in the lineup prior to, so I think it was game week 8. Game week 9, I don't think any of us were certain whether he'd start or not, but I think considering his fitness history, I think most of us could have probably predicted that he'd be back in the lineup fairly quickly, and the fact that he was back in game week 9 is quite promising, and obviously it means that game week 10 he should be absolutely fine for. Game week 10 is probably the fixture that all of us wanted to get back to Arsenal assets by. Sheffield United at home is undoubtedly a fixture primed for FPL returns, and Bukayo Saka seems as likely as any Arsenal asset to be the one benefiting from that sort of game as well. It's not just that game either. Newcastle away in game week 11 isn't a great fixture, but I do expect that to be a very competitive match. After that though, game week 12 and beyond, Burnley at home, Brentford away, and Wolves at home is a great patch of fixtures. So I would argue 4 of the next 5, you probably do want that Arsenal attacker in there. Probably an Arsenal defender as well would be quite tempting, but for today, we're going to talk about Bukayo Saka in particular. Now, luckily, because quite a few managers took him out before the international break, he has had that price drop down to 8.5, which means he's back at his starting price, which is very helpful for any of us who sold him at 8.6, 8.7, and we're just hoping that he'd go back down and we get him at the starting price rather than having to pay that little bit extra to get him back in our teams. The underlying data is still very, very good as well. XG per 90 of 0.51 is incredible for a midfielder. And when you combine that with the XA per 90 of 0.34, that's really, really strong. That is elite numbers for an attacking midfielder, for a winger indeed. And 4 goals, 4 assists really goes to show that Saka has hit the ground running this season. And for 8.5 million, he's probably slightly unfortunate not to be priced at 10 million or above, and I'd expect next season, if he continues this sort of form, he will be 10 million and above. So 8.5 does seem like a bit of a bargain for him. Now, the one thing worth noting is with Arsenal assets, there are other options available. So Gabriel Martinelli is cheaper and is in the squad again now, but he was taken off early. Trossard obviously getting the goal as well. So I'm a little bit less confident on Gabriel Martinelli than I would be of Saka's minutes moving forward. And Martinelli is an explosive player, but Saka just seems to have that underlying reliability that quite a few other Arsenal assets I think are just slightly more unpredictable in their returns. Saka just seems to be ticking over every single week at the moment. And the other options like Martin Ødegaard, again, he's taking a lot of shots. He's looking good as a player, but as an FPL asset, I think he's slightly less predictable. Quite a few of the shots are lower XG chances, and the underlying data isn't quite there for him as it is for Saka. And when they're at the same price, I think you probably do take Bukayo Saka ahead of Ødegaard, or at least that's the way I see it anyway. The one frustrating thing about Saka is the fact that despite the fact he probably has first call on penalties, he is giving them away quite regularly, and we probably expect him to take maybe 50% of Arsenal's penalties moving forward. Maybe another 30% go to Ødegaard and 20% just goes to miscellaneous, whoever they fancy giving it to on the day. But I still do think Saka will take a few of the penalties. He's definitely not a bad penalty taker. So hopefully that just bolsters his FPL appeal just that little bit over the underlying data we're seeing already anyway. As I mentioned, the fixtures ahead are fantastic, and that Sheffield United game could even be a captainable fixture if you're not convinced by the likes of Ollie Watkins against Luton or Salah against Nottingham Forest. This could be an alternative and maybe a slight differential in terms of captaincy anyway. Bukayo Saka is a player that I'm very keenly looking at ahead of game week 10. I might be looking at getting rid of one of the Spurs assets for him. I'm just not sure which yet. So let me know in the comments below whether or not you get rid of Maddison or Son for Bukayo Saka ahead of game week 10. And if so, which one of them would you prefer to get rid of and which one would you prefer to keep for the game weeks ahead? Jarrod Bowen is a player that I brought in on my wildcard a couple of weeks ago, and I'm very, very happy to have him, especially considering the last two fixtures maybe weren't the best for him in terms of the difficulty of those fixtures. But the fixture run ahead is now looking very, very positive, as you can see on the screen below. Everton, Brentford away from home, Nottingham Forest at home, Burnley, and then Crystal Palace is a great stretch of fixtures. Obviously, most of them are in green on the fixture difficulty ticker anyway, but I would argue that Brentford away from home game is also pretty good for goals at the moment. And Jarrod Bowen, when you look at the underlying XG per 90, okay, it's not quite Bukayo Saka levels, but 0.42 per 90 is very, very good, especially when you look at his price point. 7.4 million is incredibly well valued at the moment. And I think the fact that he's still under 20% owned is quite a surprise to me. I think the only thing that has meant even that he would be under 20% owned is that there are just so many other midfield options at the moment, but not many of them are hitting the sort of underlying data points that Jarrod Bowen is so far this season. And even though there might be quite a few out there that are getting an XGI, so XG plus XA combined of over 0.5 per 90, which is around what Jarrod Bowen is getting so far this season, not many of them are matching up to the XG per 90. And that's really important because you get 5 points for a goal, you only get 3 for an assist. So if you're getting a midfielder that's more heavily weighted towards the goals than the assists, you're probably going to get bigger hauls when they do return. And that's also going to help out on the bonus system as well. So Jarrod Bowen has already got 7 bonus points so far this season, which is almost won a game. And the goals are flowing. 6 goals already so far this season is an overperformance, but he is one of the key threats for West Ham. And with the fixture run ahead, I wouldn't be shocked to see him sitting on 9 or 10 goals by game week 14. If you are getting Jarrod Bowen now, you are going to be sitting pretty if he does keep returning. And I still think he's differential enough to help you really rise the ranks quickly. He's in my team for the long run at the moment. I'm not looking at getting rid of him right now. And despite the fact that there are other options available around the same sort of price, I think he is a really key member to be getting into your squad for the weeks ahead. So next up, let's take a look at a player that has been attracting a lot of attention over the international break, mainly because his competitor in that spot has been injured for quite a long period of time. So Andy Robertson went away on international duty with Scotland, came out with a pretty serious injury that should leave him out of the side for around about 2 months. So we could be looking at a relatively good medium-term asset at 4.5 million for Liverpool, and that is Tsimikas. Tsimikas, 3.4% ownership. I would care to wager that that has gone up dramatically in the last 4 or 5 days since we got the news that Robertson was injured. And again, I expect that to continue to rise all the way through to game week 10 and beyond. I'd be surprised if he wasn't around 5 to 10% owned by the deadline. So at 4.5 million already, he's already had 1 price rise, and I would expect more to come in the weeks ahead. It is worth noting that even though he is a direct replacement at left back for Robertson, he's not the only player that can play there. So I would advise a little bit of caution. He did start in game week 9, obviously, but there are other assets in the Liverpool ranks that could play left back. Klopp has said so as well. He named, I think, 3 or 4 players. The main one would be Joe Gomez. After that, there are a few youth team members that could potentially step up. I'd be slightly surprised if one of them came in. But Gomez, on the other hand, could steal some minutes off of him, especially if Liverpool want to rotate at some point for the pretty congested fixture run for the next few weeks ahead. The other thing to note with Tsimikas is he probably won't play the exact same role that Robertson would have. So Robertson quite often was playing that withdrawn role for Liverpool here and there when Trent was getting the license to go forward. However, Tsimikas isn't as strong defensively as Robertson is. So there are quite a few people out there who are assuming that Tsimikas would be the one that is getting more further forward as the left back. Trent would probably tuck in that little bit more and play more of a quarterback role, so pinging the balls from long, from deep, whereas Tsimikas would be arriving in and around the edge of the box more often. Now, the XA per 90 is already looking fairly decent at 0.25. It's a very, very small sample size, though, so I don't want to read too much into the underlying data or the fact that he's got no attacking returns so far this season, because quite simply, he just hasn't played many minutes. We are taking a calculated gamble on what he's going to be like as an asset. And Liverpool are a decent defence, but they do concede a couple of goals here and there. So I wouldn't be backing regular clean sheets every single week. I think the only other thing to mention with Tsimikas and with Liverpool is the fixture run ahead is looking really good. Nottingham Forest at home, Luton away, Brentford at home. Okay, Man City away in game week 13, you might want to find someone to bench him for around then, but then Fulham at home in game week 14. So again, 4 out of the 5 next fixtures are looking really decent, and I would care to wager that there are probably a couple of clean sheets in there at least. And if you're lucky, you might get an attacking return out of it. Now, I would advise a little bit of caution on him. I don't think it's a pick that I'm going to be jumping on immediately. I probably want to see another game or two. But if you are brave enough to jump on him quickly at 4.5 million, he is a bargain and he is very, very differential. He's got good fixtures ahead. The sooner you jump on him, the more of those fixtures you get the benefit of. I just prefer maybe a little bit of caution with him just because I'm not completely certain he's going to start every single week. I think it is likely he will, but I'm just a bit of a cautious manager. So if you're not cautious, if you want to go full steam ahead into Tsimikas and you think he's going to start every single week, then by all means, please go for it. The returns are right there and hopefully staring you in the face. I'm just maybe a little bit paranoid about him at the moment. So by all means, please do go for it and let me know in the comments below whether or not you're convinced by Tsimikas and whether or not you're going to be diving on him for the weeks ahead. So another player in another team that I really want to get targeting very, very soon for the weeks ahead is Brighton, and in particular Mitoma. Now, Mitoma is probably the most secure pick in the Brighton ranks, in the attacking ranks anyway. And at 6.5 million, he's back down to his starting price, much like Bukayo Saka is as well. His ownership is still really high, but I would care to wager that that is mainly teams that have got set and forget 11s. Maybe they haven't been making transfers for a few game weeks now. So in and around the top ranks, in and around the top million, I doubt his ownership is going to be as high as it would be in the lower ranks. Now, at just under 40% ownership, he's not going to be a differential. He will still be owned by 25 to 30% of the top ranks as well. But despite the fact he's been blanking in quite a few of the recent fixtures, the fixture run ahead would suggest that hopefully we can start predicting some attacking returns to come flowing back to the Brighton side and to Mitoma in particular. As I mentioned with a lot of the picks today, it is heavily weighted on the fixture run ahead, and Fulham, Everton, Sheffield United, Nottingham Forest is about as good as you're going to get for 4 fixtures in a block. And Brighton are a team that can score plenty of goals against anyone. But with those 4 fixtures, you expect at least a couple of big hauls there for Brighton. You can't really pick which ones they'll be in, but they're going to hopefully come at some point in the next 4 game weeks. And it would be ideal to have a little bit of that action. And Mitoma seems like maybe the most secure one of the Brighton ranks in the advanced areas. There are other options. Adringa has been starting a lot recently. I think he started 4 of the last 5 matches and he's only 5 million. So you could be looking at a real differential there instead. I think Mitoma is just that more secure pick. The underlying data is looking really, really good at the moment at 0.29 XG per 90, 0.24 XA per 90. Again, that combines to over 0.5. I always say that that is a really good looking FPL asset if they're achieving over 0.5 XGI per 90, which again is the combined 2. I would say that's really, really decent. 6 attacking returns already this season. I think he's just fundamentally a very good pick. It's just a question of whether or not you can squeeze him into your midfield. Undoubtedly, you've got a lot of very good players in there right now. I'm really struggling to find a slot for him at the moment. As I mentioned earlier on this video, I've got Jarrod Bowen in my lineup, and that would be the most natural switch to downgrade Bowen to Mitoma. But with Bowen's fixtures to come and with the underlying data, I don't really see any real reason to be doing that. So the key question with a Brighton midfielder at the moment is there a space in your lineup to get across to him? I think if you've got the likes of a Brian Mbeumo, for instance, maybe you could make that switch. Or if you're not convinced with Diaby, despite the fixtures to come for Aston Villa, maybe you could do that. But because he's blanked in a few of the recent game weeks, Mitoma isn't going to be a very popular pick to be transferring in this week, because I think a lot of managers want to see those returns first. But if you want to get ahead of the game, if you're on a wildcard this week, for instance, Mitoma could be a really good pick just to get ahead of the curve, to get ahead of that template, because in 2 or 3 game weeks, it could go to show that he was the pick to get in game week 10, because he could easily return in all of the next 4 fixtures, and I don't think any of us would be massively surprised if that was the case. Mitoma's just one example. There are other options at Brighton, like a Dringa, like Fatty, or maybe even like an Evan Ferguson as well. But I think Mitoma is just the most secure of those picks, and knowing what we do know about Brighton and Mitoma in particular, I'd have the most confidence in going with him for the game weeks ahead. So as discussed on a lot of my recent videos over the past few weeks, there are quite a lot of 5.5 to 6 million midfield assets that are popping up and proving to be really effective differentials in recent weeks. The one that I would probably recommend the most at the moment, and the one that I've got in my team since the Game Week 8 wildcard, is Anthony Gordon. I think a lot of people probably ignored him because of the suspension, and that is absolutely fair enough. But now he's out the back end of that, he's back in the side and scoring goals yet again. Anthony Gordon at 5.6 million really does seem like a proper treat to me. There are other options, obviously. Pedro Neto is ticking along. He's still getting consecutive returns every single week at the moment. But I think a lot of that is weighted towards the assists, whereas Anthony Gordon, as you can see on screen, is more of a goal threat than Pedro Neto. There are other options, obviously. Hwang is still returning at the moment. You've got Abdoulaye Doucouré, who I recommended as a differential a week ago or so, but Gordon is the one that is probably playing in the best side, the one that is scoring the most goals at the moment, and the one with the underlying data to back up the idea that that would continue for the weeks ahead. 0.35 XG per 90 for Gordon is very, very strong. It's not quite as good as Jarrod Bowen, for instance, or Bukayo Saka, as I mentioned earlier on in this episode. But for 5.6 million, that is still elite numbers and very, very good value for money. Again, combined over 0.5, he's reaching that threshold comfortably at the moment for me, so I'm very happy with him. Three goals, 4 assists. Again, there's really not much to dislike about Anthony Gordon as an FPL asset right now. The fixtures ahead, I think for the next 3, you're safe. I think you could still buy him in now, and for 5.6 million, you don't necessarily need to start him every week either. I think it is important to say that that Wolves fixture isn't the easiest anymore. Wolves are looking like a team who are threatening at the moment. They're not easy to break down, but for a team like Newcastle, I would expect them to still win that game. I still think there's a good chance for an attacking return for Anthony Gordon in that game as well. Even though it's away from home, I do expect that to be fairly decent. Arsenal at home, as I mentioned earlier on with Bukayo Saka, that's going to be a really competitive game from both perspectives. Both teams are going to want to win that game to really put a marker in the ground. That is a rival for both of them for top 4, potentially even for the league as well. So Gordon and Newcastle are going to want to hit the ground running in that game, and I do expect that to be hopefully quite a high scoring game, quite an entertaining one as well, hopefully quite full throttle. So Gordon should have plenty of opportunities there as well. Bournemouth away from home, again, it's a little bit frustrating, I think, that both of Newcastle's good fixtures in the next 5 are away from home, but on the flip side, that means that all of the difficult ones, or the more difficult ones, have the benefit of being home fixtures. And Newcastle are always really, really good at home. They always want to be on the front foot. They always want to put on a show for their crowd. And the fans at Newcastle are so good. They're so loud. They'll really get behind the team. And if they get off to a flyer in any of those games, they could really hit the ground running and hit them for 2 or 3 in any given one of those games, independent of what kind of fixture they are. Arsenal, Chelsea and Man United, I don't think any of those games I would expect Newcastle to blank completely, and I expect a goal for them in each of those matches. Anthony Gordon is almost as likely as anyone to be on the end of that at the moment. And at 6.7% ownership, he's still a very good differential to have in your side. And if you're still looking at trying to squeeze in a Mo Salah on a wildcard or even for free transfers, Anthony Gordon could free up those funds for you to get across to a second premium structure or to squeeze in an extra 8 to 9 million midfielder as well. So I'm still really hot on Anthony Gordon. There are other options available, and I wouldn't want to put anyone off of the likes of a Pedro Neto. But I think the extra goal threat for Anthony Gordon is what swings me towards him rather than someone like Pedro Neto. Do let me know in the comments below which one of those two you prefer at the moment, or if there is another 5.5 to 6 million asset you prefer the look of at the moment, like Hwang or even like an Abdoulaye Doucouré, for instance. So there you have it, 5 players that we're all talking about quite a lot at the moment, but hopefully I've ran the rule on them today and given you a bit of information about whether or not you should be picking them in your teams for the weeks ahead. In the meantime, if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, that would be greatly appreciated as always. Thank you so much for all of your support so far, and I'll see you later on this week as we look at my team selection for Game Week 10.